Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on when and where you are, and welcome to another Festival in a Box 3.0 tasting session. I hope you're enjoying it so far, or if this is the first video you're getting involved in, welcome, and I'm sure you will enjoy it. This is the Hinch Peated single malt session. Very exciting. We're talking to a very old and good friend. Not that he's old, it's just that we've known him a very long time. Mr. Michael Morris, who is the International Sales Director and doer of many things at Hinch Distillery. And I'm going to bring Michael in now. Good morning, Michael.
Good morning, Eddie. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Hinch Distillery here in the rolling hills of County Down. It's wonderful to be with you.
It certainly is wonderful always to see that backdrop, which is lovely to see a real live distillery. Is it currently operating, Michael, or?
Yeah, absolutely. We did our last smash today, actually, for Christmas. So we've been in full production 6 days a week, 5-6 days a week for over a year now. So yeah, we're hard at it, making tremendous triple distilled single malt here in Ireland.
Brilliant. And just before we get into the whiskey itself, obviously I know you I've known you for many years in all of your different roles and companies that you've been involved with. But you've been in the whiskey industry a long time, and I think people at home would, if they haven't met you, I mean, I know many will have done at our festival events, but if they don't know you already, if you could just tell us a little bit about yourself and how you came to doing what you do and what you do.
Okay. Well, when you mentioned earlier old, yeah, old's probably the right word. I've been in the whiskey business for over 30 years, so it's a long history. I've seen, I guess, I'm privileged to have been involved in the new renaissance of Irish whiskey. My background was working originally with the Bass Brewing Group, and as a result of that, in the late 80s, I went to work for Dillon Bass, were part of the Irish Distillers Group. So I had the privilege to be involved with the Jameson brand and worked there for a number of years, and really could see the initial revival of Irish whiskey on the international scene as well as domestically. After that, I went to work for Cooley, and I had 6 great years working with John, Jack and Stephen Teeling. And of course, at that point, we were the only independent on the island of Ireland, very different days from now. So back then, there were only 4 distilleries of Ireland. We were the only independent, and as of today, I think the number's now at 38 whiskey distilleries in Ireland. So Cooley was, for me, transformational because it gave me the motivation to be involved with my own distillery, or a distillery that I, had an active interest in. And I tried, Eddie, as you know, for a couple of years to get that off the ground, which is not an easy thing to do. And in fact, I found it pretty much impossible with regard to the climate and finance and just lots of other things that made it not a great time to be being involved in trying to open a distillery. And as a result of that, I worked up with Ciara Mulgrew and Niche Drinks with the Quiet Man brand, which I had a great happy time there working with our friends over in America, Luxco. So I was involved in the brand in the rest of the world, but also in the United States. And again, we had been hoping to build a distillery, which didn't come to pass. And as a result of that, Dr. Terry Cross, who was an old friend of mine, had been talking about building a distillery here in County Down, and he wanted me to be part of that. So the timing was perfect. I took the jump. It was the year before COVID. And while we were building our distillery here, I spent about a year going around the world to the international distributors talking about the distillery that was coming. And in retrospect, it was good that I did that, because when unfortunately COVID hit us and the distillery was open, at least we had already, or I personally had been all around the world, 275,000 miles, talking to people about the distillery that was coming, which meant we could then seamlessly, move into the Zoom era, where we were starting to talk to people from this room. So that's the potted history, checkered and in a very happy place now.
Well, that's all old news to me, but all fascinating stuff. And we've obviously followed your particular story with vested interest, and we're so happy that you're now settled in a real working distillery. And Hinch itself now has been operating for over a year now, is it not?
That's right. So we started making triple distilled single malt here November last year. So we're over a year now in full production. So we've been making whiskey. We also make our ninth wave Irish gin here, which is always nice from a revenue point of view while the whiskey is taking its time to mature. But yeah, so we've been making whiskey here in these stills behind me, 3-pot stills for over a year, and it's been fascinating to, number one, try the new make spirit when it came off those stills back in November, and now to see how it's starting to mature and develop. And Aaron Flaherty, the distiller, and I have been checking on the on exactly how that style has been developing, and I must say it's very, very exciting stuff.
It certainly is. Well, I was over there earlier in the year and spent a wonderful day with you guys, and going around the distillery and then having a very fine lunch at the brasserie. I have to say it's one of the best distillery visitor experiences I've had in recent years, and I think I would highly recommend to anybody watching who is planning a visit to Northern Ireland to come and visit you. And you welcome visitors by the busload, right?
Yeah, so I'm glad you're saying that. It'll certainly make the owner, Dr. Cross, very happy. But his vision was to create a full experience. So as well as having, the plan always was Terry's idea, to have a state-of-the-art, wonderful production facility, which we have here behind me, but to have the infrastructure, build it, they will come. And even though COVID was upon us at that point, Terry went ahead with building a great visitor experience so we can cope with huge numbers. We've got a brasserie, we've got 2 bars, we've got a conference center and a fantastic shop. So we certainly are ready, willing and able to accept as many visitors as possible. And although at the moment it's tricky enough and still remains that, we're getting a lot of domestic visitors coming to see us. But part of my role on the international side of things is to make sure that our international customers and ultimately consumers know that if and when they come to Ireland and they visit Northern Ireland, there is a real home here at Hinch for them to visit.
Indeed. Well, I look forward to coming to see you again next year. Now, we should talk about the whiskey that everybody has in their pack, which is the Peated single malt. And we should perhaps talk about the current range, because in the efforts to be transparent as possible, it should be pointed out, and I'm sure you're going to do this anyway, that the whiskies in the bottles at the moment isn't what's being distilled behind you, because obviously that would not be possible because it's not whiskey yet. So it might be good to kind of give a little bit of background as to how that works. And in Ireland as a whole, it's a much more common practice to bottle whiskies from current distilleries whilst you wait for the liquid to mature from your own distillery, right?
Well, look, that's Eddie, a good question. Clearly, Irish whiskey as a category has been the fastest growing spirit category in the world for a number of years, led by the big brands, and one big brand in particular. It's opened the doors for the category all over the world, and there's great interest in Irish whiskey in the younger demographic, 25 to 35-year-olds, a lot of women coming into the category for the first time. So it's very much an explosive category, and that's why 10 years ago, or maybe a wee bit more than that, you had only 4 distilleries in Ireland. You've now got 38, so you've got a huge investment in capital cost here in Ireland, and there was only a finite amount of mature stock. So consequently, a well-geared company like ourselves, as well as building the distillery, we bought a large number of mature casks. That inventory on the island is now virtually gone. So that gives us an opportunity to create an awareness internationally for the name of Hinch. It allows us to get a brand out, the brands or SKUs of a brand into the market, and also for us to get to know our distributor platform, to get to know consumers, all ahead of our own whiskey coming on the market, our own single malt. And actually before that, our whiskies now, our malt's a year old. So in 2 years' time, we'll also be blending it with grain whiskey that we buy. So that's all coming down the track and interest, but the real interest, massive interest for us will be in the future when we have our own single malt. But what you've got here today, let me speak about this directly, is the peated single malt, which is very much at our course. Peated single malt in terms of Irish whiskey, because it takes you into a direct comparison with Top Islay, Scotch generally. And this was where we thought we would have one of the SKUs where we thought we would have something very interesting to say to consumers by tackling a part of the category that internationally anyway consumers do not associate with Irish whiskey, which tends to be super smooth, triple distilled, non-peated.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I've just poured myself a little so that I'm keeping pace with you.
Me too.
That's a nice flared glass you've got there. Look at that.
Yeah, this is the 2F glass. It's an Irish company are producing this beautiful glass. Obviously, the go-to Glencairn glass has been a mainstay for many years, but in Ireland here, companies like this company are producing ancillary kind of stuff that goes with the category to try and give us our own identity. And I think it's a very, very nice glass.
Very good. I'm stuck with a Glencairn. What a shame.
I now know what to get you for Christmas, as well as a bottle.
Oh no, I love a Glencairn. I like to try lots of different glasses though, but Glencairn's a very good staple. Anyway, to the whiskey. So what should we be looking out for?
Okay, so what again, we decided to go, the ppm count in this whiskey in the background is 55. So we went with something that was going to be very heavily peated, I guess, in that sense. My background with Cooley, I was very familiar with and loved selling the Connemara brand, which was is dear to my heart because I had always great fun taking Connemara with Cooley to the international markets, and I remember us winning awards in Scotland with it, which was always good fun, particularly the Turfmoor, the very heavily peated version of Connemara. Mm-hmm. So we followed that footsteps. We actually launched this whiskey at the Edinburgh Whiskey Festival, and again we won a silver medal at the part of the festival that was to do with new brands and new spirit. That gives us great confidence. So 55 ppm, but it is triple distilled, so heavily peated on the nose. You get all the classic kind of smoky notes that you would expect. But when you taste the whiskey, it's very interesting. The triple distillation pushes the alcohol back and softens the peat, I guess, down somewhat.
Just to explain to those people that aren't aware of the term ppm, I'm sure there are some that are. It's phenol parts per million, which is the way in which we measure how heavily peated the barley is, generally prior to it being distilled. And so 55 ppms is very, very high. It's around Ardbeg levels.
Yeah, higher. and yet, Eddie, hopefully, as you agree, in its own way, it's totally unique because yes, it's got the nose of an Ardbeg style peated single malt, but when you taste the product, it's not like that at all. It's definitely a place apart. You get the unmistakable peat notes. I've already told you it's quite strong in that sense. The triple distillation plays the game of softening everything down, which makes it, in my opinion, and our opinion, much more palatable, much more easy to drink. This is not something that, this is sipping whiskey. The alcohol is at 43. Yep, just to confirm, 43. But I get no sense of it being strongly alcoholic. It's all about flavor. The citrus notes that we get in our whiskey, and which is, I guess, also accentuated with the use of the first and second fill bourbon cask, the only things that we use here. It's just a lovely balance between the fruit, kind of dry fruit that we like to see in our whiskies, and then this lovely smoky note, which does not in any way overpower the palate. It's, very, very lovely balance. And look, I've spent a lot of time with this whiskey. It's actually, we launched it just of interest. We launched it as part of our drive in the United States with Chopin, our partner over there, and the RNDC network. and it has proven to be fantastically successful. They originally thought that it might be something that only a number of states would take, but we're now in full distribution at 15 states and growing. So in some of these key markets where peated single malt consumers know what they're about, this whiskey is, and this particular SKU is proving very, very happily very successful. I hope everybody likes it.
Yeah, it's quite a youthful peaty whiskey, so it's very vibrant and quite almost slightly effervescent as well. It's got a kind of citrus zestiness to it, real vibrancy.
Nice. Yep. No, I agree.
Which is really quite invigorating.
Well, yeah. Well, look, again, I guess part of our mission statement here in Hinch is to be, and it took us a time to fall on what our mission statement would be. We obviously want to be classically considered to be an Irish whiskey company. But in this part of Ireland, we're up in the north, we're quite close to Scotland. So there is potentially, I think somebody said 22 miles as the crow flies. And we're quite near the coast. So we've a cultural kind of connection with Scotland that's very strong in this part of the north. And it's something that we're quite proud of. So in a sense of whiskey, it gives us an opportunity to potentially be a bit bolder than some of our contemporaries on the island. We're going to try and create a style of whiskey which is not going to be we're not going for being overly smooth or outdo everybody else in terms of just this kind of smooth style that is really being so successful with Irish whiskey. We're hoping, and very much hoping, and I think we put the groundwork and the foundations down with the whiskey that we've made this year, that Hinch will become an unmistakable style of Irish whiskey, and boldness as a character in the whiskey is something that we're striving to attain.
Yeah, and in terms of what you're striving for and so on, can you tell us a bit more about the spirit that you're producing? Are there any particular quirks? I know you mentioned it's triple distilled. Is there anything else going on that, in terms of fermentation times and cut points and things like that, which you can make us aware of, which will kind of make you stand apart from everyone else?
Yeah, well, look, we're doing three things here in terms of our own distillation. Yes, our signature brand will be triple distilled single malt Irish whiskey, but we're also going to be experimenting and have done so with double distilled single malt, and we're also making and the double distilled and the triple distilled will be unpeated single malt. But then we already have made a batch of peated single malt here, triple distilled. So there's three distinct styles, and actually it was fabulous here 2 months ago when we made the batch of the peated single malt, because the peat reek around the building and in the nearby area was just astounding. You could be in up in Donegal with the peat fires everywhere, or out in Islay. It just had a real sense and smell of that. So look, there's three things that we're putting markers down in terms of trying to get that style. Our distiller is going, as I say, for quite a bold flavor profile. And later on, I would love to have an opportunity with yourself and with the listening public to have our distiller come and actually talk you through the original spirit that was produced over a year ago and how it has changed in the 12 months since. And the style is definitely, at the beginning, was incredibly fruity. I mean, the fruit note in the new make spirit was just fantastic. And again, alcohol at over 60%. It did not burn the mouth. It was very approachable. And we tried it only a month ago, and as well as obviously taking on a slight color characteristic from the B1 bourbon casks, it's also now developing quite a more complex fruit note. Some of the higher, fresher notes have now disappeared, but there's something much more lingering, much more subtle going on. And from the distiller's point of view, and I guess me as a salesman's point of view, it's great to see that what's coming down the track is something that's going to be incredibly interesting. And we hope unique. So unmistakably Irish, but with a kind of bold tinge to it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, yeah, certainly from my visit earlier in the year, I remember Aaron letting us taste some really interesting stuff, because obviously you're not just using bourbon casks, you're using all manner of sherry casks, and I think there was a Moscatel cask or something like that. I think the bit we loved the most, if we could put a finger on it, was the big room you have, this sort of tasting room where you have all the different new makes and the different styles of sherry and port and so on, all on display, but also available to nose and taste. It's just very, very clever and interesting and engaging way of describing flavor, and how the flavors are manipulated by the different types of oak. And
that's the spectrum room, and the spectrum room is very much that. We were very keen that this place will be about whiskey education. So as well as hopefully where people will come and love the spirit and buy our products and so on, and like the whiskey and tell their friends. Big part of the mission here was to see if we could produce something in terms of the layout, the spectrum room being one of those parts, where we would talk the consumers through the journey of how white spirit gets darker, how the management of the wood is all important, what the wood gives in terms of flavor to the original base spirit and so on. And you're absolutely right. We have got all these different types. Give you a very good example. Don't tell anybody, of course, but an example where we, with some of the mature stock, we have just produced what I believe is the finest thing we've ever made here, which is a 12-year-old that is wheat finished in Amarone casks, the Italian wine from Massey, very well-known house. Oh my goodness, this is absolutely superb, absolutely beautiful bottle of whiskey. The spirit, the mature whiskey finished in those Amarone casks for over a year has just produced the most magnificent whiskey. So as a result of that, as soon as we realized, and this is how we're quite nimble and on our feet, when we realized that the liquor and those casks in particular did such a beautiful finishing job, we immediately got some more casks in and put some new spirit in there. So we're going to come up with a whole range of things. You have to believe me, and you've seen it yourself, Eddie, but we're going to come up with a whole range of interesting things, and wood will be at the heart, and the management of wood and the finishing in wood will be at the heart of a number of things that we're going to do. But that Amarone would be a very good example.
Yeah. I mean, I think the thing that comforts me the most, aside from yourself and Jamie, is Aaron, the distiller there, who I've come to know quite a bit, who unfortunately couldn't be with us today, but he is such a massive whiskey geek himself, and he loves experimenting, but he also he knows that he has to get the spirit absolutely bob on first of all. So it's not just about wood management and so on. It's about making sure that the spirit is absolutely as it needs to be before it even goes into the wood, which is obviously very, very important.
Yeah, and I think it is an extension of that. Semi-controversially, we brought out, in terms of the stock that we bought, a pot still, classic Irish pot still whiskey, and the original thinking was that as well as making single malt, we would make some pot still here at Hinch. But the decision then evolved with the help of the distiller and the management team that actually our point of difference here is single malt, not pot still. Pot still is very well known, beautiful as it is. It's much more well known in other parts of Ireland, whereas up here in the north, not so, in terms of if you're trying to go back. So believe that single malt is the way to go. And the distiller in particular believes that, if you're doing single malt, then that's what you should be doing. And pot still, leave pot still for others. We might make tiny amounts of that to see just how how our style would be different from others, but it's certainly not going to be part of our core.
Right. Just again, to let everyone know, if you're not aware of the term pot still, it refers to single pot still, which is a style of whiskey, as Michael pointed out. It's very traditional in Ireland, which is using a mash bill of unmalted barley along with malted barley, which creates a very unique style of whiskey in itself. And as Michael points out, a really lovely style, but it's quite unique to certain parts of Ireland. But yeah, that's interesting. I think that's a good decision. I think it would be very easy to get super excited and try and create everything for everyone, but ultimately you want to establish your own style, and I think the single malt is probably the way to go for you guys, right?
Yeah, I think Peated is probably the additional step that we've made, and that's probably comfort enough.
Yes, I think so. Well, what do I know, Michael? Anyway, so listen, in terms of the wider whiskey industry, and I know you travel a hell of a lot, being the international sales director that you are. Is there anything going on within the whiskey industry, wherever it might be in the world, which really excites you or even concerns you in any way?
Well, look, one of the things that I'm very interested in is the fact, and I'll reference a nod to Scotland. The Scotch Whisky Association have done a fantastic job that I've been aware of for many years, in terms of making sure that the integrity of Scotch whisky is protected around the world from other countries and other styles that would like to steal the clothes of Scotland, and call themselves Scotch or pass themselves off as Scotch and so on. And the Scotch Whisky Association do a wonderful job of making sure that what comes out of Scotland stays pure in the blended and the single malt sense that you see around the world. What I'm delighted, we're proud members of the fledgling Irish Whisky Association. So the Irish Whisky Association does a great job. William Lavelle and the guys, what they do is they actually have taken the template of what Scotland do to protect the integrity of Scotch whisky, and they're doing something exactly similar and the same for Irish whisky as an emerging category. Because of course, the reason I mention that is you've 38 distilleries, everybody charging into the global markets, looking for share. So there's no doubt a temptation potentially in the future where some shortcuts people will be trying to take shortcuts in terms of what they can and they can't do to gain share. So the Irish Whisky Association are there to make sure that Irish whisky, as it emerges from the shadow of Scotch and it starts to become a much bigger player on the international scene, that the integrity of the category is being protected, and all the signed up members like ourselves, for better or worse, follow what are the best traditions, and that's the way it should be. And I then pick up the fact that when we're selling our brand, but in some of these new emerging markets, we're trying to explain to people, it's an education to the trade. In Eastern European countries where Irish whiskey's on fire, out in Asia, which is still only beginning to happen, where we are having to explain what makes Irish whiskey different from Scotch. But as importantly, we also have to make sure that the trade and distributors and ultimately consumers know that we're every bit as good as Scotch, because we follow all of the same, to a large degree, disciplines that protect the integrity. That's the big battle, because as Irish whiskey rapidly grows, it's so important that the integrity is maintained by everyone. And for me, that is the most interesting aspect of international business at the moment, and it's an ongoing battle. But I think the foundations are very well laid down, and as guardians, they do a great job, and we play our part, as almost all Irish distilleries and Irish bonders do.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. No, regulation is very important. In terms of the regulations, the rules themselves surrounding, use of, different casks and whatever else, are the Irish regulations following the Scottish, or are they a little bit kind of looser, or is there any notable differences?
No, I there were certain examples which I won't mention. I won't mention them, where people push the envelope. But the Scottish model, which let me say, because it always need to be said, making whiskey, started in Ireland. We were first and Scotland followed, but then Scotland took it to a whole new place when the Irish whiskey industry went into huge decline through no fault of anybody's. But now that Irish whiskey is a renaissance, is coming back as a category. No, the Scottish model in terms of the technical files and the wood management and everything else, by and large, has to be followed. And because it is the high bar, it's the high standard which works. It's the high standard that works from the point of view of everything to do with quality. And whether we like it or not, those quality standards that have been set by Scotch whisky companies and the Scotch Whisky Association are now very closely followed by us. And I think that's a good thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it's to be applauded. So anyway, lastly, Michael, and once again, thanks for giving us your time today. A slightly more relaxed question, shall we say? What's your favourite tipple outside of whiskey? What can we find you drinking, if you're drinking, outside of your own whiskies?
Okay, well that's a two-part question.
Okay.
Okay, two-part question. My go-to favorite drink over many years practicing and coming to love it is Guinness. So that may not be a shock to anybody, but I do love a pint or two of Guinness and regularly imbibe. Sometimes my wife would say a bit too much, but that for me is the end of a perfect day, is having a pint of Guinness. In terms of spirit, my favorite drink, actually, outside of obviously whiskies and our whiskey, which I certainly do enjoy, is gin and tonic. So the fact that, and this honestly isn't a plug, believe me, Ninth Wave Irish Gin, which we make here at our distillery, is actually my favorite week on week drink. I love gin. I love gin and tonics. My brand forever was Tanqueray. I found that very, very hard to beat. But the Ninth Wave, which we make here, initially I wanted to support our company and drink it, but I've come to love it. I think it's well worth people trying it, and that's not a plug, that's just a fact. Tell the truth. So, so that's my favorite tipple is a gin and tonic. Happens to be our brand nowadays, but I do love Tanqueray, and go to all the time is Guinness.
So, do you drink gin and tonic during the winter?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I do. Yes, I do.
See, I was talking to Amanda about it last night, and I was like, I couldn't face a gin and tonic in the winter, but I could definitely push to a Negroni maybe.
Yeah, but can I say, Eddie, one of the things about gin and tonics that COVID, I think, is certainly affected in my head. When I see the price of a gin and tonic in a bar, and you're drinking gin and tonics at home, it's quite hard to reconcile that aspect of drinking a long drink where you've got an expensive mixer and you've got a spirit and you see what it costs, and then you see what you can drink at home. And the amazing thing is that doesn't seem to translate with whiskey in my head, but with the gin and tonic, it definitely does. It seems to be a very expensive thing to be doing in a bar.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of people have been drinking at home for the last 2 years, and it's but at the same time we need to try and support the bar trade as well. So it's a difficult balance, isn't it?
It is.
Anyway, listen, Michael, I don't want to keep you any longer. I'm sure everyone at home has thoroughly enjoyed the chat and the tasting, and they can then move on to the next one. But anyway, we'll definitely see you next year. We'll see you at the shows. Hopefully I will make it over. I'm sure we'll make it over at least once next year. Come and see you. But for now, we'll say Slanger.
Slanger indeed. Thank you, Eddie. And thanks everyone for your time.
No problem at all. Thank you so much, Michael. And we'll speak very soon.
Cheers.
Cheers.